Welcome to this recording about process costing and work in progress. What you will find is that in a continuous process, at the end of any accounting period, if we were to stop the process at that point, we would find that there were a number of units that were not completed. So they are our work in progress. We need to be able to value our work in progress, and in order to do this we use something called the equivalent unit concept. The way in which the equivalent unit concept works is that it looks at how complete our work in progress is and works out how many equivalent complete units that equates to. An easy way to think about it is if you had 2 glasses of water and each glass was half full, that would be the equivalent of 1 full glass of water. And that's what we do with our work in progress. So if we had 2 products or 2 units that were each half complete, then those 2 units, 50% complete, so they're half complete, is the same as saying we have 1 complete unit. So 2 units, 50% complete, is the equivalent of 1 complete unit. So we have a second example here, 120 units of work in progress, 70% complete. So 120 units which are 70% complete is the equivalent of 84 complete units. So that's what we mean by the equivalent unit concept. We look at how many units of work in progress we have. We make an estimation as to how complete those units are, and then we calculate the equivalent number of complete units. However, it's not always quite this straightforward, because what you may find is that the units have a different degree of completeness. By that, I mean that they may be complete with regard to material, but not complete with regard to labour and overheads. So here we have 120 units of work in progress. They're fully complete for the material, but they're 50% complete for labour and overheads. So now it's a little bit more difficult to work out the equivalent units concept. What we mean in this example, if the units are complete with regard to the material, it means that all the material we need to use for those units has been used. But in order to finish our units off, we just need some more labour. So for example, if it was a product that was made up of a number of components, you may have all the components you need, so you've got all the material, but the components need to be assembled, so you need some more labour. And at the moment they might be 50% assembled. So another 50% of the labour would allow you to finish the units. And obviously if we need more labour, we're going to have more overheads. So we're going to look at an example now as to how to value not only the work in progress, but also the units that are complete when we are told that there is a work in progress. So if we have a look at this example, a process has the following details. We input 950 units, so this is our material. That cost us £5,460. The labour and overheads that went into the process cost us £4,340. We have 850 completed units and we have a closing work in progress of 60 units. There was no opening work in progress. Every question that you come across, there will always be no work in progress opening. So although it states opening work in progress none, because it's none, you don't need to worry about it. We're also told to treat all losses as normal and they have no scrap value. The closing work in progress is 100% complete for the materials, but only 30% complete for the labour and overheads. So how do we approach this? The first thing that we do is exactly the same as we've done for every other process costing question, and that is to work out the physical flow. So we have the example up here. We have input equal to output plus the normal loss plus now a work in progress. What you could also see in your physical flow is, as you've seen before, you could still come across an abnormal loss, or you could still come across an abnormal gain. And remember, you add your losses and take off your gains. This example, we haven't got abnormal loss or gain because it does tell us that we are to treat all our losses as normal. So what did we input? We input 950 kilos. Sorry, 950 units. Our output was 850. Our work in progress was 60. We know there's no abnormal losses or gains. So that means that our normal loss must be 40 units. 850 plus 40 plus 60 plus 0 gives us our input of 950. So there's our physical flow. And for every multiple process or single process costing question that you do, you must always make sure that the first thing you calculate is your physical flow. Now the second thing that we calculate is the cost per unit. Now previously we have worked out the cost per unit by using a formula. Input costs minus the scrap value of the normal loss divided by the expected output. You can only use that formula when there is no work in progress. Now that we have work in progress, we have to look at a different method of working out the cost per unit, because we have to consider the equivalent units. So this is our step 2. Now you'll notice we have 2 columns, one for material and one for labour and overheads. This is because our work in progress has different degrees of completeness for material and labour and overheads. The first thing that we put in is how many units we've both started and completed in the period? Well, we know from our physical flow that we have 850 units of output, so they're complete. So they were started and they were finished. So they're complete in terms of the material that was being used, and they're complete in terms of the labour and overheads. Then we look at the work in progress. We know from our physical flow we have 60 units of work in progress. This work in progress is 100% complete for materials. So 100% of 60 is 60. The work in progress was 30% complete for labour and overheads. So 30% of 60 is 18. Next, we would put in the abnormal loss. Now there is 0 abnormal loss in this example. But if you had an abnormal loss, you would put it in under both columns, and it would be the same figure under both columns. So for example, if we had 10 units of abnormal loss, they are completely lost. So 100% loss for material, so we'd put 10 under the material column, 100% loss for labour, so we'd also put 10 under the labour and overheads column. So your abnormal loss, if there is one, you put the same figure under both material and labour and overheads. There's no abnormal gain in this example, but if there was, that would have to go into our calculation. It would go in under both material and labour and overheads, and it would be bracketed because it's a gain. And as for abnormal losses, however many units of gain there are, you would put the same number of units under the material and the labour and overheads. We can now total. So 850 plus 60 gives us 910. 850 plus 18 gives us 868. So that's the total equivalent units. Equivalent units being abbreviated to EU. So from the material, we've produced the equivalent of 910 units. And from the labour and overheads, we've produced the equivalent of 868 units. Now we consider the costs. What were the costs of the material? So material, £5,460. And the cost of the labour and overheads, £4,340. And finally, now we can work out the cost per unit. If you think of per as meaning divide, we're doing the costs divided by the equivalent units. 5460 divided by 910 gives us £6. 4340 divided by 868 gives us £5. So the total cost of a complete unit is £11. So that is step 2. Step 3, as we did before, is to now value everything. So valuation of our output. We're going back to the physical flow Our output 850 units. Cost per unit £11. Normal loss, same rules apply as before. Normal loss only has two possible valuations, either 0 or scrap value. We're told normal loss, no scrap value, so therefore our normal loss is valued at 0. And then we come to the work in progress. Now, work in progress, it's 60 units, but those 60 units are 100% complete for material and 30% complete for labour and overheads. So we have to value our work in progress in two parts. If we look at our material column, we have 60 units of work in progress, and the cost per unit of the material is £6. So our work in progress, 60 units times £6. Now look at our labour and overheads. We have the equivalent of 18 units of work in progress, and the labour and overhead cost per unit is £5. So we do 18 times 5, which is equal to £90. So our total work in progress valuation, £450. So now we have all the information that we need to put our figures into the process account. So here's our process account. If we look at the debit side, we input material 950, which had a value at 5460. We input labour and overheads, which was 4340. Our output was 850 units, which we now know has a value of 9350. Normal loss was 40, which has a 0 value, and our work in progress is 60, which has a value of 450. Now if we total it all up, there should be no balance. The debit side should equal the credit side. So add up the units, add up the values, add up the units on the credit side, and add up the values. So that's the process account complete. And those are the steps that you need to go through if you are told there is a work in progress. So just to recap, if there is no work in progress, you can use the formulae input costs minus scrap value of normal loss divided by expected output. If there is a closing work in progress, then you need to use this method that we have just worked through. If I can add just one other thing, in this example we were told that the losses had no scrap value. If you do have a scrap value, then the material cost that you entered, so in this example we entered 5460 as our material cost, that material cost is reduced by the scrap value of your normal loss. Okay, so if I just make a note of that. So you need to reduce your material cost by the scrap value of any normal loss. So had there been a scrap value to the normal loss here, the material cost would not have been 5460, it would have been reduced by the scrap value. So that's the same as you've done before. If you think about the formula you've used up to now, you have done input costs minus scrap value of normal loss. So that's what we're doing here, but we're just reducing the material. So the material costs minus scrap value of normal loss. And then you would carry on and work out your cost per unit, carry on and do your valuations, and finally your process account. So that's how you deal with a work in progress. And that brings us to the end of this recording.